Good evening and welcome to Thriving Thursday. My name is Andrea Bucalato and I am the manager of the Cancer Center Complementary Care Program. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thriving Thursday is a collaboration between the Dartmouth Cancer Center and the American Cancer Society. Tonight's program marks our 11th presentation in this series. Our topic today is preventing cancer and living a healthy lifestyle. Before I introduce our speakers, I have a couple of housekeeping tips. Please use the chat feature for any questions you may have, and we're going to save the questions to the end when we will have a Q&A session. Our first speaker is Dr. Simon Khagi. Simon is the medical director of the Nashua, Manchester, and Concord sites for Dartmouth Cancer Center. At these locations, he provides patient care and has direct oversight of clinical personnel. He works with clinic administration to assure that the highest quality care is provided to our patients. Simon also holds an appointment as assistant professor at the Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth. Prior to coming to Dartmouth, Dr. Khagi served as assistant professor for the departments of medicine and neurosurgery at the University of North Carolina School of Medicine in Chapel Hill, where he was also the director of the neuro-oncology program. Our second speaker is Elise Cushman. Elise is a hands-on dietitian, whether it's working with feeding tube dependent patients or teaching about kitchen hacks to make healthy eating doable. Elise began her career as a pastry chef, but craved more human interaction and science. After completing her master's in dietetics, Elise has taught in the food and beverage industry, yet kept her hands in the clinical realm. Having specialized in oncology for nearly 10 years and being a board-certified specialist in oncology nutrition, Elise blends food and medicine for healing. Let's hear from Dr. Khagi.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. It's really, truly a pleasure to to engage with this group and certainly provide my my expertise in answering your questions about cancer prevention and what can be done. And I'll kind of give a high-level overview of the field. And as many of you know, cancer is not one single disease. There are many, many different types of diseases under that umbrella with lots of different causes and contributing factors that we're going to touch on today. And we'll certainly dive into the nutritional and sort of the effects of dietary modifications that can hopefully decrease your risk of cancer. So with that, I'll kind of just jump into my presentation here. So again, very high level overview, just to basically reiterate that cancer is an aberration of cell growth and division, where you go from a normal cell that develops abnormalities within the cellular division process, from perhaps multiple angles, or perhaps it already was predisposed to aberrant cell division because of some sort of underlying genetic abnormality. But a lot of the causes we do somewhat understand, and there are, I'm sure, many others that are unbeknownst to us, and we're currently doing research to understand that. But the ones that are very well known to us are exposure to radiation, ultraviolet light, smoking, carcinogens as a whole, infections from different viruses like HPV and Epstein-Barr virus, various types of chemicals, either within our environment or exposed from work like asbestos, as well as our primary focus today, which is going to be on lifestyle and dietary factors as well. But in a nutshell, these sort of insults cause an aberration in the cellular process of division and essentially immortalizing these cancer cells, and they no longer respond to sort of the signals that the body would generate otherwise to stop cell growth. And once that happens, this leads to a tumor. Some of these tumors may stay localized and cause a lot of damage sort of within their local area. And at times, these tumors can metastasize to various other parts of the body, either within sort of that local region, to lymph nodes, or using the lymph system or the blood system to go to more distant sites of disease, such as liver, brain, and other organs. And like I said, cancer is not just one disease. The processes of cancer are varied, and how we treat the disease is also variable depending on the actual process, using chemotherapy, immunotherapy, targeted therapy, and genomics. But the disease itself, in a nutshell, like I said, is basically an aberration in cell division. So just some quick stats thrown your way. The most recent data of 2019, where we have a full understanding of sort of the incidence data. We've had about 2 million new cases of cancer. In that year, 600,000 people passed away of their disease of cancer in that year as well. Certainly an unacceptable number. And the information that we have thus far between 2013 and 2015, the probability of developing cancer in a male, in a female, is roughly about 40%-ish, with prostate cancer being the most common cancer subtype in men, and the most common cancer subtype in women being breast cancer. The probability and the incidence go up over time. So after the age of 70, the risk of cancer goes up pretty dramatically. Around 30%, of patients, of people can be expected to develop cancer after the age of 70. And these are non-skin cancers, so not a squamous cell, not a basal cell. So I titled this slide as, the best offense is really a defense, or a good defense. And that's when we talk about prevention and screening. And statistics suggest that about 50% of these cancers that are being diagnosed per year, the 2 million that we talk about every year being diagnosed, at least since 2019 for the most recent data, about 50%, a million people a year, we can actually prevent those cancers. And that is a staggeringly huge number. So you can imagine 50% of people do not have to be diagnosed with their cancer if we try to modulate our environment, our lifestyle, and our diets. And that really falls a lot on us and our personal choices, but also our governments, our industries, in terms of regulating our exposure to these risk factors. So things like avoiding those carcinogens that I mentioned. So we've done a lot of work in mitigating exposure to things like asbestos, various other chemicals. The state of California actually states that certain chemicals that you're being exposed to in your plasticware, in the furniture that you buy, actually carries a designation that it could cause cancer. Similarly, decreasing the risk of smoking as well would decrease the exposure to carcinogens. Other lifestyle modification, dietary changes, which we'll get into a lot today. Medical interventions, like if you're high risk for breast cancer or you have a high risk lesion in your breast, there are chemopreventive measures that you can take to further decrease your risk, as well as surgical measures to do so as well. And of course, early detection, which I'll kind of touch on as well. Those lifestyle factors could actually significantly contribute to development of cancer. Similarly, if you really decrease exposure to smoke or stop smoking, lose weight to a BMI of less than 30, increase your physical activity to beyond 3.5 hours per week. And that is a doable thing. And that could be as easy as walking, as a little bit of weightlifting, as biking, as swimming. There's a lot of things that you can do to increase your physical activity, and improving your diet with more fruits, vegetables, whole grain, and decreasing meat consumption have all been associated with decreasing your risk of a lot of these types of cancers that you can see here on the right side of the slide here, that are associated with lifestyle, with our lifestyle choices that we make every day. One thing I can touch on is that alcohol, that has gotten a lot of press lately because really it's been shown that any amount of alcohol, it can be detrimental to your health, and from a cancer standpoint can be detrimental as well. And it has been associated to increase the risk of cancer by, for example, double the risk of cancer in the liver. There is a moderate association of with alcohol exposure to breast cancer. If you're a light drinker, a little bit less so. If you're a heavy drinker, almost 2 times the risk. And there are other cancers here listed as well. Environmental factors as well play into it, as I already mentioned. Things like arsenic in our water, asbestos, benzene, which comes out of fuel, beryllium, which is actually a byproduct of nuclear waste, as well as cadmium, as well as that's a byproduct of battery development. Coal combustion and things like wildfire smoke have been associated as a potential risk factor in development of lung cancer. And the list goes on, but this is actually a short list compared to the things that have been associated with cancer development. That's not to say that you need to go out and be afraid of everything that you touch, but there are some things that are more that increase your risk than others. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. The things that you can control, I want to emphasize that if you smoke or you have family members that smoke, it is imperative that they quit, because that will decrease their risk of lung cancer, in their lifetime. Things like radon, if you live in an area with high radon, getting radon testing and perhaps radon mitigation, although it can cost a bit of money, can decrease your risk of developing cancers. So along with all that, genetic risk factors do exist, and these are some of the cancer subtypes in the organs that are associated with inherited mutations. We know that a lot of ovarian cancer can be associated with an inherited genetic mutation, along with breast cancer, but we're learning that things like prostate, stomach, head and neck, kidney cancers can have that sort of genetic predisposition, as well as things like glioblastoma and brain cancer can have a genetic predisposition. And I do regularly, me personally as a neuro-oncologist, screen my patients for these genetic abnormalities that may suggest an underlying cause of their cancer, because that is important perhaps for their children and other family members to be tested as well. And this on the right, you can see here this little diagram showing that the majority of ovarian cancer is actually related to BRCA mutations or BRCA, but there are other types of mutations that can be passed on to sort of within the lineage that can also predispose to cancer as well. This is just basically to show that there are some genes that are related to one type of cancer, but are not related to a different type of cancer. So those relationships are just delineated by the p-value. If it's very, very, very small with that negative exponent there next to that 10, that is a very strong relationship with that gene and that particular cancer. And if you look to, you look on the breast side, you look on the ovarian side, some genes that are commonly associated with breast cancer are not really associated with ovarian, and vice versa. So this is just to make the point that just because you have a genetic alteration doesn't mean that you're going to be predisposed to every cancer. It is just some cancers that are more likely with certain abnormalities than others. And then screening. Screening is exceptionally important. There's just a couple of slides on this before we move on to the more nutritional discussion. But screening, please, if you're of age or you have a genetic predisposition, make sure to get your colonoscopy for colon cancer, or do the DNA testing, the stool DNA testing, which is very easy. It's just a card that you get in the mail and you just send back the sample. Mammograms for women, especially young women, they may even need breast MRIs because it's just the anatomy of the breast is different in the younger female. So it's extremely important if you have those genetic risk factors, especially to be screened appropriately. Other things like abdominal MRIs, if you have a risk factor for kidney cancer or pancreatic cancer, you can also potentially consider that as a modality of screening as well. But very, kind of common things that your PCP should also be discussing with you, like annual skin exams with your dermatologist or PCP, a low dose CT scan if you have a history of smoking or a current smoker, prostate exams as well, although that's a little bit controversial these days, and pelvic exams and pap smears for, especially younger women to pick up cervical cancer that might be related to HPV or high risk HPV. And these recommendations, as sure of ourselves that we want to be when it comes to making these recommendations, they can be moving targets. They can be dynamic. More information comes to light. We do more research. We do more epidemiological studies. And it sometimes shows that we should be screening perhaps people earlier, or perhaps we should be screening different populations, as opposed to, for example, 2013, we were thinking 30-pack years smoking history should be eligible for the lung cancer screening. It actually is now showing that it's more beneficial to screen people who smoked even less cigarettes than 30-pack years, but rather down to 20-pack years. So, and even younger people as well. So that opens up the pool of those people that need to be screened. And similarly, there could be differences between organizations like the American Cancer Society or American Society of Clinical Oncology or United States Public Health Task Force, which can give different recommendations for screening in terms of like things like mammography and prostate exams. So they can be moving targets, but not by much. And if you do have questions, talk to your PCP, talk to your oncologist if you're already hooked up with an oncologist about how to mitigate your risk further and decrease your risk of developing cancer. And with that, I will leave it to the next part of our conversation.
Bear with me. Bear with me. Why can't? All right. Can everybody hear me? Can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Awesome. Because I can't figure out how to do the camera.
That's okay.
It was there. Now it's not. So I'm just going with it. All right. So I think I skipped ahead. Yeah. Did I? Yes. Okay. So thank you for this opportunity tonight to share this information. And I'm going to really focus on healthy lifestyle. So we're going to break this down into the healthy eating aspects of cancer prevention and the individual recommendations that you can adopt for cancer prevention. So both the American Cancer Society and the World Cancer Research Foundation, or the American Institute of Cancer Research, as it's known here in the US, each issue guidelines for cancer prevention and risk reduction. Both of these groups translate the findings from science into practical actions that we can all make. And just a little bit of background, the American Cancer Society, oh, hold on, sorry, I'm on a tangent, but I found the video. Maybe I didn't. Okay. Yes, got it. I'm sorry. The American Cancer Society was founded in 1913, and they work to provide direct patient support in addition to research and guidelines. And the American Institute of Cancer Research was founded in 1982 to increase the awareness of diet cancer links. So the cancer prevention recommendations provide the answer basically to what can I do as an individual, but not only that, a bigger purpose. And so we'll also address survivorship recommendations to reduce the risk of recurrence and as we go through this. Okay, well, now that I've got the camera, I can't move any slides. There we go. Okay, so what does it mean when we talk about cancer prevention? In terms of cancer prevention, we're not referring to individual cancer cases per se, but looking at the bigger picture. So think forest versus the trees perspective and what you may be able to do within your community, your country, and the world, and trying to reduce the number of cancer cases. But then also too, we're going to take a closer look and what can you do in your pantry, in your kitchen, that sort of thing, to reduce your overall risk. And we know that there are certain steps that you can do to reduce your overall risk. We know that at least 42% of newly diagnosed cancers in the US are potentially preventable. And according to the research, we can avoid a lot of cancer cases, but we can't stop them all from happening. The research also shows us that some of the differences between people who do and don't get cancer involve healthy lifestyles. And also keep in mind that the recommendations to reduce the risk of cancer are not a guarantee, but to be used as a light to guide your path and how you decide to live your life. Evidence suggests that the more closely you follow these recommendations, the lower your risk of cancer is overall, but each step you can take helps. So your risk is reduced even if you don't follow the recommendations perfectly. And let's be honest, we're human, we're imperfectly perfect. So no one's gonna follow this perfectly. So what are the recommendations? Overall, both of the organizations recommend to obtain and maintain a healthy weight, move and get physical activity, and a healthy diet. One major change in cancer prevention guidelines over the years has been a shift from a reductionist or a nutrient-centric approach to a more holistic concept of diet. So people eat whole foods, not nutrients. The emerging evidence that suggests healthy versus unhealthy dietary patterns are associated with a reduced risk of cancer, especially for colon and breast. What's more is that the American Cancer Society and the American Institute of Cancer Research, their guidelines for prevention also line up with the guidelines for prevention and management of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes. So they all line up together. In looking at this slide, the American Institute of Cancer Research offers a lot of challenge. They'll do a healthy plate challenge. They'll do, this is one they've got going on right now, the 30-day prevention checklist. And you can see these are all steps that you can do to reduce your risk of cancer recurrence, but it also just to improve and incorporate a healthy lifestyle. And then we're gonna break down, if you look on the chart on the right hand side, we're gonna break down some of these suggestions a little bit further. And then this is what the American Cancer Society recommends. So you can see they're pretty much mirroring each other. And we're, again, gonna break it down. So if you're feeling lost or overwhelmed on where to start with adding in things to make a healthier lifestyle, take small bites to get there, small steps to get there. Thinking of adding healthy habits to your life instead of taking things away or swearing things off or all or nothing approach, because that overall sets you up for failure. Because again, we're all perfectly imperfect and you're never going to be perfect. So now we're going to look at what a healthy plate is. So both organizations really heavily emphasize on incorporating more fruits and vegetables into your day, more whole grains. And as a dietitian, we always encourage having a healthy plate, healthy bowl, whatever meal you're eating. Take that as an opportunity to ask yourself, where can I incorporate a vegetable or fruit in this? So by dividing your plate into quarters, so a quarter of it being your protein, a quarter of it being your whole grain, and then the rest of the half of that plate or bowl being a fruit or a vegetable, or filled, I should say, filled with fruits and vegetables. And so let's just look at how our plates have evolved. So traditionally, the standard American diet, and you may have heard it called the SAD diet, because that's what it means, standard American diet, or that's the abbreviation, is really heavy on meats and lean on the vegetables. And what we've seen is that cultures that follow these types of diets have more incidences of cancer. We've seen that cultures that follow diets with more whole grains and vegetables and fruits, also think less processed foods, have lower cancer populations. So if you put these two plates side by side, the one on your left, some people would say, but wait, that's over half of it filled with vegetables. But really looking at it, peas and potatoes are higher calorie, carbohydrate dense vegetables. There's leaner options, higher fiber options out there. And this was like the second generation of trying to get to a healthier plate. The first one had more meat, I believe. But then if you look at the plate on the right, you can see that it's over half filled with the vegetables. There's definitely more fiber in there, more variety, which leads us to our next slide, more color. So you want to eat the rainbow. A great way to increase your fruit and vegetable intake is to follow the rainbow and eat the rainbow. And take an overall, again, forest from the trees view of trying to incorporate different fruits and vegetables into your day. Ask yourself, can I start my breakfast off with a fruit and a vegetable? Let that be a little bit of a challenge. I will say cauliflower blends in really well to smoothies, and you don't really know that it's there if you want to sneak in a vegetable. And it's a cruciferous vegetables, and cruciferous vegetables have been shown to have a really high impact in reducing risk of cancer. But I digress. If you're able to start your day off with a fruit and a vegetable, just by that alone, you're getting 2 out of the 5 recommended 5-a-day servings of fruit and vegetables in your day. And what we do know is that, and I say this in all of my presentations, 9 out of 10 Americans do not get the recommended 5 a day. 9 out of 10. So there's always room for improvement. We also know, looking as time has progressed with both American Institute of Cancer Research and American Cancer Society, that they're not necessarily focusing on specific nutrients from certain vegetables. They're focusing again on just a varied plant-based diet. So it's not you need to eat a quart of blueberries a day. That's not the answer. It's what again can you do to add more vegetables, add more fruit into your day, increase your fiber, and be healthier. The next recommendation regards red and processed meats. So the recommendation is to limit red meats to 18 ounces per week. You can also lump this in or lump the processed meats into this. So bacon, salami, deli meats, I should say, even pork. It's not the other white meat, it's a red meat. And even game meats are considered red meats. So there is that. And then we've seen regular intake of small amounts of cold cuts, bacon, sausage, hot dogs. There's a greater risk for colorectal cancers. Be aware when you're grilling, there are 2 compounds that when you cook meat at higher temperatures or smoke or grill the meats, it can produce a cancer-causing compound. One is called the heterocyclic amines, which are HCAs, and the other is polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are PHAs. So the PHAs are present in the flames, and these actually stick to the meat when you're grilling it. And the HCAs are proteins in the meat that react with the intense heat of the grilling, the char broiling, or broiling of the meat. They're not unique to red meat, but which alone, they don't explain the difference in the risk of red meat compared to poultry and seafood. So that's still a questionable thing, and it needs more research. But what we do know is that grilled vegetables and fruits don't have these compounds. And another thing that we know, so I'm not telling you if you're fearful and swearing off red meat, that's not necessarily what I'm saying. If you marinate the meat, studies suggest that marinating meat before grilling can actually decrease the formation of the HCAs. So putting a little thought into that and thinking ahead before grilling and marinating, it can save you in the long run. So we also limit the consumption of energy-dense foods. So the average American eats anywhere from 150 to 170 pounds of sugar per year. For a lot of people, that's their weight in sugar. the American Heart Association has been specific in providing guidelines for added sugar for men. They recommend 36 grams of added sugar a day, and women are 25 grams. So what does that mean? Because we're the US, we don't deal really with grams. So breaking that down, there's about 4 grams in 1 teaspoon of sugar. For men, that's about 9 teaspoons of sugar in a day of added sugars. And for women, that equals about 6 teaspoons. So where does this lead if you're looking at a nutrition label? So we're going to look at the bottom left corner of this slide. And recently, as recent as last, I think, February of 2021, the nutrition facts labels were updated. So they look a little bit different. You may or may not have noticed this. But when you're looking at a label of anything, and if it's processed in any way, it will have a nutrition label, even if it's minimally processed foods like the chopped vegetables from the produce area at the grocery store, even frozen vegetables, they'll have a nutrition label. But you want to look at, when you're looking at the label, the total carbohydrates. Despite what you've heard, the overall carbohydrates are what really impacts the blood glucose levels. If there are added sugars, the new nutrition label will have that, and that's the second yellow circle down on the label. And so that's what you're looking at. So this example, for instance, didn't have any extra added sugars. It had carbohydrates. Where fiber is also listed in there, and some people will get really persnickety and look at the fiber, and if it's got a certain amount of fiber, they'll only do net carb. Well, I'm not talking about that. Just talking about looking at the overall total carbohydrates, because in your body, for simplicity's sake, your body breaks down sugar or carbohydrates into the form of sugar, and sugar is what goes into every cell within your body for energy to live. So you need it. And just a little comparison is these are common beverages that are not water when you look at the chart. And I've tried to make this into an apples to apples situation. And while the sizes have grown over the decades, a standard soda is no longer 8 ounces, and coffee comes in lots of sizes, lots of shapes, and lots of options. Even juices now, they're not 4 ounces, which is a serving. But it's really interesting, because if you look the next time, wherever you are, if you look, milk has stayed relatively the same. It's usually in a pint or a half pint container, and it's unadulterated unless it's really chocolate, which is not much more added to that. But looking at this chart, you can see that not every carbohydrate is created equally. Fiber definitely helps to slow down how quickly the food or the liquid is absorbed and goes into the bloodstream and can do anything to your blood glucose levels. Protein and fat within that fluid or food can definitely help to slow down how quickly that's absorbed. And none of these drinks have fiber in them, I will say. The oral supplements sometimes do have fiber, but most of them don't. But when you look at milk, it's a wonderfully balanced food. It's got fat, it's got protein, it's got carbohydrates in it, and it's going to be the slower liquid that's digested and give you the most nutrient bang for your buck. So looking at this slide, a plant forward or a Mediterranean diet, not a SAD diet or a standard American diet. These diets are filled with vegetables, whole grains, beans, fruits. What we've seen and what we've known, and just looking at the cultures that follow this, they have a lower risk of overall cancers. Fiber and the micronutrients that these type of diets provide are thought really to be the answer. And as a dietitian, again, we always recommend that you eat your vitamins through whole foods first versus taking supplements. So keep that in mind. Whole grains or whole grain intake has also shown to lower the risk of colorectal cancer. And it's suspected that this is related to the fermentable fibers and the resistant starch that whole grains contain, but more studies really need to be looked at for this. Both the fermentable fibers and the resistant starch help to feed the gut and feed the gut bacteria, but they've also been shown to reduce inflammation. So whole grains, legumes, beans, that's the way to go too. Lastly, for alcohol, this was recently updated. It used to be, and I think it was just this year, it used to say women can have one, it's okay for women to have 1 drink a day should they choose to drink, and men up to 2 drinks per day. But now the American Cancer Society is saying it's best not to drink at all. And again, should you choose to do it, we go back to the women, no more than 1 drink a day, and men no more than 2 drinks a day. And what we know is that alcohol can adversely affect how the body repairs DNA damage and defends itself against free radicals. So what are the recommendations to reduce cancer mean for people who have already been diagnosed with cancer? So lifestyle choices highlighted in both of these organizations' recommendations promote overall health. We know that. Many of the lifestyle habits that increase the risk of cancer also increase the risk of other chronic diseases, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, like I've mentioned before. And sometimes cancer or its treatment increases the risk of overall health problems, and it can exacerbate other health problems or chronic issues too. Lifestyle habits could also influence the risk of developing a second cancer at some point. So if you've already been diagnosed with cancer, I always recommend don't be a backseat driver. For a lot of the patients that I work with, treatment teams, caregivers, they have tended taken the reins, gotten them through treatment and stuff like that. And a lot of patients feel like they don't have much in their control. This is providing you some ways to sort of take back that control, because you can control what you eat and how you eat it and the variety of what you eat. And that can reduce your overall risk of cancer recurrence. So that is all I have. Okay. Bear with me because I have a new share. Stop share. Found it. Okay, so thank you.
So now is the time where we will do questions and answers. Just wondering if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And Andrea will moderate those questions and answers here in a moment.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I couldn't turn it back on. Hi, we have a couple of questions that have come in. First, for Simon, what happens if something shows up in my cancer screening? What do I do next? You know, let's say I've had a mammogram and I get a message that there's something abnormal found. What happens next?
So typically the radiologist will give you a call back and arrange some sort of image guided, most likely ultrasound guided biopsy of that area. After that, a little coil, which can be seen on x-rays, will be placed to mark the area of concern. That's only if there's sufficient evidence based on the pathology, whether or not there was actually a cancer there. So if you do get a positive mammogram result, they'll call you back, do further testing, potentially put in that little coil to identify the area in question, and then most likely send you to a surgeon who will either do some sort of further biopsy or a lumpectomy. It depends on the size. It depends if there are lymph nodes that are involved as well, which would be further evaluated using other imaging. But really that next step is to go to a surgeon. This is specific for breast cancer to see how much of that area can be removed. It varies, depends on different types of cancers. Colonoscopies that find a polyp, will have a different treatment strategy. But most sort of the direction that it all goes towards is mostly towards surgery to surgically address the area. If it's determined that the cancer had spread, then most likely the question of surgery is off the table, but not always. And at that point in time, a medical oncologist and a radiation oncologist potentially might get involved early in the care of the patient.
Thank you. Elise, I have a question for you. You mentioned high temperatures when barbecuing. What about air fryers? Those are high temperatures. Do those cause any carcinogenic issues?
That's a really good question. I don't think so. I think because it's the flame interaction with the protein that's causing this. Whereas fryers, air fryers, and even like baking or braising, those temperatures can get pretty high too, but they're flameless. So I would have to look into that further, but just from a kitchen science standpoint, I wouldn't see that it would.
Okay, thank you. Simon, another question for you. You mentioned cervical cancer screening, for example, is for young women. Are there screenings that have an age limit where you reach a certain age and you don't need to have those screenings anymore?
Yeah, and what I mean by young women, it's a very relative term. I believe that the guidelines suggest that screening should at least start around age 20, 21. It could even be earlier, and it could actually go on for at least a decade or two, depending on what's sort of found. Occasionally, there are high-risk cells that are found without perhaps an HPV component, without actually finding the cell, the virus that's associated with cervical cancer development, and then you would continue on with the screening. This cervical cancer screening is by no means indefinite in a woman's life. However, depending on sort of what's found and prior positive pap smears, that could necessitate sort of more prolonged yearly screening. So it really does vary. I'm actually not sure on the exact time point when we tell women to stop if they've had normal ones. I think that might be maybe around age 50, but I'd have to check. My gynecologic oncologists are much more well-versed in screening of gynecologic cancers.
Thank you. And Elise, another question for you. You mentioned we should eat the rainbow. Are there certain colors of food that are more nutritious than others?
I'm going to say no. It's whatever fruits and vegetables that you can get on your plate, realistically. Most patients that I work with, and just in hearing their recall of what they've eaten in the past 24 hours, it is the standard American diet. It's meat and potatoes, maybe a vegetable. So really it's however you can, throw in a little bit of color into that. So with my cooking demonstrations that I do, we've done, for instance, some smoothies with blueberries and red cabbage in there because they blend in really nicely. I've done other things with cauliflower and banana in a smoothie, that sort of thing. But if you're doing, eggs in the morning, is there mushrooms and green peppers and spinach that you can throw in with it? That sort of thing. You can do a lot, and it doesn't matter if it's fresh, frozen, canned. It's what you can afford that's most important, and what we'd like for you to get onto your plates. So that would be my recommendation for everybody and anyone, is just thinking about it. Even a snack, okay, whatever, depending on if you're having cheese and crackers, what can you put with that? Can it be some apple slices, some melon chunks, a handful of blueberries, anything to just add a little bit of color, and a little bit goes a long way within the day.
Thank you. Does anyone want to put any additional questions in the chat?
Andrea, we have two more. One is for you, Elise. I tried to eat the rainbow, but it all tasted awful, and I could not get my family to buy in. What advice do you have to make it fun and tasty, and how do I compete with McDonald's?
Great questions. A little bit at a time, gradually, especially if you've got younger kids in your family. And I'm right there with you. I get it. I've got an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old. So it's having, and for a lot of times too, depending on the age of the child, it's more a message of, and this is behavioral, is just having the option there. You could kind of do a no thank you bite if they're young, and so they can try it, but just having it there for them to see it, to try it, for them to see you eating it as well. I know I eat way more fruits and vegetables than anyone else in my family, and someone in my family who will remain nameless told me I eat too many, which I think is impossible. But so for instance, for my kids, having they don't like carrot sticks, but they'll eat baby carrots. There's not much difference, which drives me absolutely bonkers, but they'll like it with peanut butter or with hummus. Ants on a log. It's been around forever, but it's a good way. And I realize celery is not much nutritional value, but it's good fiber, but those are some good ways. Apples and peanut butter, that sort of thing. If you're having yogurt, can you put some fresh fruit with it? And again, it doesn't matter if it's frozen, canned, or fresh. It's sort of meeting them there. And if it tasted disgusting when you tried it, that I have many questions for whoever asked that, because is it because are you in treatment and you've got taste changes, or is it just because you're not used to eating fruits and vegetables and figuring out how to prepare them so that they are tasty? Like that's a whole nother thing. But yeah, there's definitely you can get creative with it, and I hide vegetables in everything. So if it's soup, if it's anything simmering, I throw in more vegetables and more fiber in there, and my family knows that. And sometimes they don't eat it or they'll pick it out. It's just trying. I believe that you have to present a child with a new food. It's like over 100 times before they'll eat it. So you may feel like you're pushing up against a wall, but continue to try.
Thank you, Elise. So Simon, here's a question for you. I have read research that cancer patients undergoing chemo have better outcomes when on a plant-based diet. Can you comment?
Yeah, sure. So, I think the research is still out how much of a plant-based diet would benefit somebody on chemotherapy. I think intuitively, it's probably a good idea because you get more fiber in your diet. Cancer patients are typically very constipated because of the treatments that they're on, and it's difficult for them to regulate their bowels. That alone would justify, more of a plant-based diet. And just thinking sort of from a theoretical standpoint, if consumption of red meat, meat that is grilled or cooked that releases those toxic chemicals, even though it's in moderation, how much is that playing into, increasing overall inflammation and potentially worsening the side effects of chemotherapy, or even contributing to cancer cell growth? That's hypothetical. We don't really know. I think, the studies, which I'm not super familiar with, don't really argue one way or the other right now. But I think intuitively having a more plant-based diet, in fact, more of a Mediterranean-based diet, which I recommend to almost all my patients who are diagnosed with cancer, could potentially help with, their overall longevity, in addition potentially with those side effects that I mentioned with chemotherapy.
Thank you. Thank you all for your great questions, and thank you for joining us this evening. We will be sending out an evaluation, so please look for it in your email and respond to help us improve our programs. Simon and Elise, thank you for your great presentations and sharing your knowledge this evening. We hope to see everybody in a future Thriving Thursday event. Our next one will be in December. Thank you.
Thank you.